Hello, I'm Cyril Lachelle, and for the last few decades, I've been collecting classic video game magazines from around the world. In my time hoarding issues of Electronic Gaming Monthly, and Die Hard Game Fan, and Mean Machines, and Next Generation, and more, I've come across weird and crazy stories that have been completely lost to time. That is, until now. You see, I'm on a one-man rescue mission to find and talk about the most interesting and controversial moments from all of your favorite weekly, monthly, and even quarterly publications. So why don't you grab a chair and join me for this debut episode of This Old Magazine. A lot of people think that just because I talk so much about Nintendo Power and Electronic Gaming Monthly that I only collect classic video game mags. But that's not true. In fact, I've been spending a lot of time going through many of my old issues of Entertainment Weekly from the early 1990s. Of course, this doesn't come up much because EW was always more about covering movies, music, and television than looking at games. That's not to say that they never reviewed games, because here you can see them giving the Sega CD game Snatcher an A grade, but I think it's fair to say that interactive entertainment wasn't their main focus a quarter century ago. Now, before you accuse me of going off topic, I first want to draw your attention to their 250th issue, which was published all the way back on November 25th, 1994. It's in this 104-page magazine where we find a fairly typical list by Susan Stewart that lists the 10 best shows for kids and the 10 worst shows for kids. I don't think you're going to be all that surprised by the shows that end up on the best list, since it includes fan favorites like The Magic School Bus, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Family Double Dare, and yes, the short-lived My So-Called Life coming in at number 1. Now stick with me here, because you also saw predictable 90s faces on the worst list too. As expected, she complained that Married with Children was profane, promiscuous, and bitter, which isn't exactly a hot take. Beavis and Butthead also made the list thanks to its graceless vulgarities that aim at the lowest common denominator. Of course, none of this is especially surprising and probably not newsworthy. However, there was a TV show on the list that actually kind of surprised me, and that's Sonic the Hedgehog. Coming in as the 9th worst show for kids in 1994, Susan complained that Sonic doesn't know if it wants to be Indiana Jones, or Bambi, or a commercial for Nintendo. Wait, why would it be a commercial for Nintendo? I mean, look, I know that Mario and Sonic are best friends these days, but that definitely wasn't the case back in 1994. Pretty much the last thing the Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon wants to be is a commercial for Nintendo. I think Sega was more than okay with letting Lou Albano hawk NES consoles in the Super Mario Super Show. But hey, before we let Susan off the hook, I also want to point out another odd choice that kind of blew my mind. 4 spots above the charisma-less Sonic the Hedgehog show is Darkwing Duck at number 5. She criticized the show for being so frenetic that it's hard to tell what's going on. Oh, I'm not gonna lie, this one actually hurts. Darkwing Duck was probably my favorite of the Disney afternoon shows, so I'm honestly a little shocked to see it ranked worse than Beavis and Butthead and Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. How was it possibly worse than Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman? I mean, are the episodes really that hard to follow? Maybe I need to go back and revisit some of those episodes and find out. When you bought an issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly in the early days, you knew what you were getting yourself into. I'm talking about short, 4-person reviews, game-breaking cheat codes, a fake ninja, and even a guy who made wild predictions with mixed results. Now, one thing you didn't expect to see in an issue of EGM were celebrities. Well, except for that one time Fabio was on the cover, of course. That's what makes the 12th issue, which was published exactly 30 years ago this month, so interesting. You see, they decided to cover an event where a hot new band plays Ninja Gaiden 2 for the first time, months before it was scheduled to come out in retail. Alright, so let's go ahead and play a game. I'm gonna read the first part of this write-up and you tell me what band you think they're talking about. Alright, here we go. Ryu Hayabusa may be the nastiest ninja in Nintendo land, slaying the evil forces of Jackio and Ashtar. But Tecmo's Master Ninja was no match for the Masters of Metal. Alright, so who do you think they're talking about? Is it Metallica? Maybe Megadeth? Or what about Slayer? Or hey, maybe they went old school and it's Black Sabbath. Nope, it's none of the above, because this is about that one time when Anthrax played Ninja Gaiden 2 for a photo op. Alright, this odd and out-of-place blurb is baffling for so many reasons. For example, EGM called Anthrax the hottest new band, despite the fact that they had already released 5 albums, including the just-released 1990 breakthrough album Persistence of Time. I also love how they didn't even get a single quote from either bassist Frank Bello or drummer Charlie Benante, which they spelled wrong. It's not Benate, it's Benante with 2 N's. In fact, this whole segment is so pointless that they essentially run 2 identical pictures of the band, both with giant promotions for hair rockers Poison in the background. Alright guys, here's some advice for budding games journalists who get to do a photo op with a popular band. Ask them a question. That's it, just ask them some questions. Do they like playing games? Have they played the first Ninja Gaiden? Do they hate being called the hot new band when they've been around for almost a full decade? Ugh, seriously, anything is better than this. Now, I think it's fair to say that most of us have never had our letters published in a magazine. After all, there are thousands, if not millions of readers each month and very limited space to answer every question. So the chance of getting your letter published was astronomically small. I think that's why I'm still so impressed with Scott Whitmore, who somehow managed to get his 9-letter question answered in not one magazine, but 2, both in the same summer. Alright, so this is actually something that I noticed when I went to E3 for the first time all the way back in 2002. You see, back in those days, we were encouraged to take free issues of all of the print media, including everything from the big names like GamePro, all the way down to the local regs like Foul. It was during this trip when I grabbed these 2 issues, the 6th issue of Play and XBN number 3. Why are these important? Well, stick with me, you'll see. On the ride home, with nothing more to do but read the free magazines I stuck in my carry-on bag, I ran into Scott's simple question in both of those different magazines. He writes, how many of you gamers out there are Christians? Now, I have to imagine that Scott spent the first half of 2002 mailing that question to literally every magazine he could think of. The first response came in June, when Play tried to be as precise as possible by saying 12,133,611 at last count. For their part, XBN was more playful, saying if you're asking about the Xbox Nation staff, we have 2 snake worshippers, a reformed holy roller who is now an atheist who believes in God, and a guy who routinely bows down to a picture of Lorenzo Lamas. Oh, and our freelancers are all voodoo shamans. Okay, so they obviously didn't take the question very seriously. That's fair enough, you get what you get. But you know, I've always wondered if Scott was satisfied with these 2 answers, or if he was just happy to see his name in 2 different magazines in the same summer. Looking back on it now, I kinda wish that he had been more successful. It would have been fun to see how every old school magazine would have answered that question, especially Die-Hard Game Fan. Oh, and don't even get me started on all those UK gaming mags where they spent more time insulting the reader than actually answering questions. What, you don't know about that part of gaming history? Well, we'll get to that in a future episode. You'll see. Alright, here we are at the end of the first episode of this old magazine. Now, before we turn the page on this week, it's time to do what we always do. Look at the best and worst magazine covers of the month. Seeing as we've already looked at Electronic Gaming Monthly's issue from July 1990, I thought it might be fun to see what else hit the newsstands exactly 30 years ago. Yeah, I think we can all agree that this is not one of EGM's best covers. But let me tell you, it's a whole lot better than what CVG had for gamers on the other side of the pond. This is a genuinely frightening take of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Sorry, I mean Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. It's the UK after all. And no, I don't think that smaller picture of Raphael is that much better. On the flip side, I actually really like this Judge Dredd design on the Games Machine cover. In fact, I like the whole atmosphere, including the fog, or maybe that's smoke in the background, and the addition of Midnight Resistance. That little running gunner doesn't get enough attention if you ask me. This is an eye-catching cover that uses the license the right way. Nintendo Power, on the other hand, did not use the license properly. Look, I went into more details on this Rescue Rangers take back in an episode of Nintendo Power Uncovered. But to quickly summarize, this is the very definition of lazy design, especially when you compare it to that DuckTales cover just a few months earlier. I just can't look at this design without wondering how Fat Cat is able to stick his paw through a closed window. What's the point of the wood separators if there isn't any glass? It just makes no sense. Speaking of things that continue to baffle me, have you seen this video games and computer entertainment cover? Oof. I honestly can't tell if it's supposed to be Dracula, the Joker, or my uncle when I walked in on him watching porn. I guess it's supposed to be some random magician, but why is he only using his thumbs? Would the Turbo Express have done better if he had put both hands into it? Would it have lasted more than an hour on a single charge if all 10 fingers were involved? I guess we'll never know. But there is one thing that I do know, and it's that we've gone cover to cover and finally come to the end of the first episode of this old magazine. No matter if you're an avid collector or just somebody who wants to relive their youth, my name is Cyril, and I want you to keep flipping. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of This Old Magazine. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we spend a lot of time talking about classic megs like Electronic Gaming Monthly and Nintendo Power and more. Now, here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite old school magazine? You see, I'm partial to EGM and Next Generation, but there's good stuff in pretty much every one of these publications. Here's hoping that I can cover even a fraction of the craziness. In other news, we'll be back on Sunday with a new episode of Defunct Games News, followed by the 100th episode of Game Over. What will it be? Yeah, I guess you'll just have to tune in next week to find out. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.